Finally, final segment, or actually no, we still have to cover the Pope too. We'll get that later. Let's start with Douglas Murray catching some strays in the latest Joe Rogan podcast episode. Let's take a listen.
Have you been there?
Right, that's a good point.
You haven't been?
By the way, how is he in all these wars? Can I just go to wars? By the way, how are you allowed to just go to wars? Is that the way
you should at least
can you just
have the
go to
courtesy of going there.
Can I just go to wars, or do I have to come back and say what people want me to say about the wars? Can I go to the wars and have my own opinions, or do I have to have the opinions?
Not if you want to go back.
That's right. That's right. It's very interesting, this war tourism. How do I get on this war tourism?
Yeah.
I'd like to go to the Ukraine.
Well,
I want to go. I want to go. I want to go to all this war tourism.
Do you have any awards that they can melt down and make bullets out of?
Joe, think about this. Do I seem like a guy that has a lot of awards?
Didn't you get one of those YouTube plaques when you hit 100,000?
I don't even know where they send it. I don't know where. I don't know where they're sending those YouTube plaques.
We've got a few of those.
But I like this idea of war tourism. I like the idea of going to a war and then coming back, having a very black and white view.
Yes, I've been there.
I get it, and I know, and interesting. Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. I love that.
You feel better than the other people.
Well, of course, there's a lot of people. It gets very murky. Most people I know that have been to war have a very murky, complex view of things. But it is good to go to a war and then come back and be as sure as you were before you came.
And you don't have to go for very long.
No, you go for an hour.
Couple hours.
It's a lunch.
Yeah.
It's lunch on the front line.
Put on a flak jacket that says press.
Whew, that's rough there, Ryan. For Douglas, if for anybody who doesn't get the photo reference, let's put that one on the screen. Our producer Griffin's been dying to show everybody this photo for quite some time now. This is the chair where Sinwar, what was killed by an Israeli drone, and as you can see, Douglas there on an IDF-sponsored tour with his big press flak jacket, not really in danger because again he's on a IDF military-sponsored thing. Tim actually made the best point, and that's something that I immediately texted Dave about, is I was like, dude, he keeps saying you've never been there. The only reason he gets to go is because he's a pro-war propagandist, and so the government is allowing him to go. If you or I tried to set foot in the crossings, we're done, all right? We're done. I don't even know if they'll let us in the country, all right? And having been to Israel before I was ever made any public statement, holy shit, I have never been put through the ringer. Any other country in the world, why are you here? What are you doing? Is your dad Muslim? You know, it's wild. Yeah. And that's if you're just a normal visitor to the country. That's not made up. Those are actual questions. Nowadays, oh man, yeah, if you and I try to set even 100 miles foot in Gaza, not gonna happen.
A lot of people who've been come back with a far worse impression of the situation on the ground than they had before. But yeah, it was quite strange to hear Murray say it, because anybody who's casually followed the conflict knows that Israel has banned Western journalists from getting into Gaza. So then how on earth did he sneak in? Oh, it turns out the IDF put him in their own little flak jacket and drove him to this scene for this photo op. I don't think you should be able to wear a press vest in that circumstance. In what way are you press? Like you're just completely.
You're just play acting. I mean, Tim made a funny joke about Ukraine. I mean, it's the same thing. Like, what, you think you or I are getting anywhere close to the Ukrainian front line? And I'd say the same thing about Russia. You know, if Russia was like, hey, you want to come in to it's like, no, I'm not being used by you, to show me what you want on your little dog and pony show. And this is the same for anybody, as you and I know, covering the Pentagon beat. You only get to see what they want you to see. Right. You get to ride around with the secretary. Yeah, they make you feel important in a Humvee or whatever, but you're never going off the base. You don't get to go embed with troops. Actually, one of the interesting things is that in the early days of the war, during Iraq and Afghanistan, they actually did let journalists do that, and they started to pull back those, so that you don't have. Remember that documentary Restrepo? I mean, that changed a lot of people's minds. Or that book Generation Kill, having the guy literally in the front Humvee, and people were like, oh, "This is a clusterfuck. I can't believe that this is what's happening." They shrank that stuff way down. So, and that's our military, which is relatively more open. Now we're talking about the Israeli military, Ukrainian, and other things. So that was the preposterous nature of his argument. But there's also like a personal thing happening there where Douglas, he opened his segment with Joe by being openly antagonistic, being like concern trolling him over not having enough people on who are pro-Israel. He later came to the expert thing.
The specific moment that he was challenging Dave Smith about, have you been there, was about when Dave Smith said they're not letting in humanitarian aid.
Yes.
And he said, well, have you been to the crossings? And what's so insane about that is that Israel has announced that since March 2nd, I don't know when he did his little tourist trip there, but Israel announced on March 2nd that they're not letting in aid. They said it publicly. They have repeated that many times since then. They have publicly said they're not letting in aid in order to put pressure on the Palestinians through starvation to get them to reach a different deal than the ceasefire deal they'd reached before. All you need is, you don't even need a subscription to newspapers. You can just read the free versions, and you can read these quotes from them. You don't need to go to the crossing. In fact, if you go on an Israeli-sponsored trip to a crossing, and you observe anything different than what they are saying they're doing, then you are being lied to. Separately, the idea that you could just stand at a crossing and look at some trucks, and that gives you any indication of what the humanitarian condition is inside of Gaza is also preposterous. The idea that you could sit in Sinwar's chair and know what the prices of eggplants and tomatoes are at the market is absurd. The way you find that out is you talk to Palestinians who go to the markets. There are more than 1 million of them. You can talk to them. So reporting can be done without going inside there. Reporting can be done by Palestinian journalists who are inside Gaza. But the notion that you have to be there in order to see that is undermined by the fact that what he was saying, that aid was getting in, was a lie. He was wrong. So yes, he's been there. But he's either a liar or an idiot.
You're exactly right. And yet, him and Bill Maher had to further concern troll together on Bill Maher's show. Let's take a listen.
You were on Joe Rogan a couple of days ago, a week ago, something like that. It got a lot of press. And I'm glad you said what you said, which is, I like Joe, but he has on people who entertain these crazy conspiracy theories and doesn't really push back on them. It's okay to have, I'm a free speech absolutist pretty much. But there seems to be no pushback on this.
The reason I did this pushback was, you just have to. You just have to, in my view. It's basic social hygiene. If you've got somebody who's coming along who pretends to be a historian, who then can always do the thing of saying, oh, I actually don't call myself a historian. It's just other people I allow to call me a historian. I'm not a car mechanic, but if I kept on being introduced as a car mechanic, I would say, oh, no, you got the wrong guy. So they don't mind it. They don't mind it. They have this slip out. These people that I was trying to call out on Joe's show, they are doing things like Hitler wasn't that much of an anti-Semite. Main problem in the 20th century was Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill was the warmonger. Adolf Hitler wanted peace. And look, it's a matter of social hygiene. Don't feed me this shit. What they're watering and what's going to come up underneath them are going to be people who believe this rot. And a lot of people, you can clearly see on the right at the moment, are very happy if you can denigrate the tradition of Winston Churchill and pretend that Adolf Hitler wasn't so bad, because then you can do things like Christian nationalism. You can do really, really tough nationalist stuff. They basically
can buy Kanye albums.
That's the last stage.
So strawmanning, he's like equating Dave Smith, Daryl Cooper, and Ian Carroll all in one. As he showed on the show, he did not even really know that much about Cooper and or Ian Carroll whenever he was trying to denigrate them. But, let's just come back to the final point about having been there and about gatekeeping. This is a guy who, again, when he was in his, mid-20s, wrote Neoconservatism and Why We Need It in 2006, when the Iraq War was a disaster, has since written books about migration, about wokeness, and now about whatever his latest In Defense of the West book is. He is just as unqualified and as lack of an expert as any of those individuals. And to be honest, actually less informed, obviously, from, his public comments that are all on the subject. They're so reductive. And then finally, for these two free speech, non-gatekeepers and all these people, bullshit. You're advocating right there for gatekeeping. And when's the last time anybody interesting was on Bill Maher's show? Be serious. Let's be honest.
And on the point of him not being informed, he's really playing weird games with this line where he was saying that people, quote unquote, downplay or Hitler's anti-Semitism. So apparently, like what he complained about on Rogan, he's like,
if you were to get into that, we can. But yeah,
we should do a second.
Oh, sure.
Because what he's saying. So Daryl Cooper and others have said that at various times throughout Hitler's rise to power, he downplayed his own anti-Semitism and his true designs for the Jewish people in Germany and throughout Europe, because those views were unpopular with the German public
and abroad,
in particular abroad, and he had to smuggle those views in, and then once he got power, then he and people say, well, he wrote Mein Kampf. It's like, yes, so it feels like this shouldn't have to be explained to people, but apparently it does. Politicians often will say something early in their career that is the truth, and then as they rise through power, they downplay that.
Correct.
Say, I didn't really believe that. I'm not for 150% tariffs, or I'm not for pure free trade. Whatever is in your interest in the political moment, you say that. He's not saying that Hitler was not a thorough anti-Semite through and through, with designs on a genocide, a Holocaust. That's not what he's saying.
Let me just lay this out for people. Chapter 1, I was doing a rereading. Chapter 1, Volume 2, Ian Kershaw's Hitler, 1936 to 1945, called Nemesis. There's a citation. Chapter 1 about the 1936 Berlin, which year was the Olympics? I think it was
36, yeah.
1936 Berlin Olympics. They took down all the anti-Semitic signs, specifically to do what? To make sure, to downplay the anti-Semitic. So this is a matter of empirical fact.
Because they thought it was embarrassing.
This is a matter of fact. Okay,
right.
Fact. They even admitted it in documents that Kershaw is able to review. And by the way, Kershaw is about as Kershaw is not a quote-unquote objective biographer. He hates Hitler. I mean, rightfully so. He hates Hitler, and he makes it very clear. And you know what's funny is he actually does the same thing in his introduction of his book that Daryl does, where he goes, I detest Hitler. I find him disgusting. However, I want to view with an objective as a lens as possible as to how this person's ideology was able to rise in Germany. And with that, we must have some empathy and to try and to understand from which this arose so that it may never happen again.
Right, and if you listen to Douglas Murray, then your view of Hitler is that he always was from his chest expressing his full anti-Semitic viewpoint, and he came to power anyway. The reason that Douglas Murray's view is dangerous is because it is wrong, and because it would lead you then to say, okay, a future Hitler who we're going to try to prevent from coming to power is only someone who was always screaming their anti-Semitism from the rooftops. And that if they downplay it at any point, that's not Hitler. And so we can then it's okay. Okay, they've toned down some of their rhetoric, so let's give them a second chance. What the actual reading of the actual Hitler is that you have to figure out what they're going to do on your own, not just from their own rhetoric. Because if you allow their rhetoric to control what you think of them, they're just going to fool you like Hitler fooled the German public. So Murray's interpretation, which is ahistorical and illiterate, is actually the dangerous one because it could cause people to then miss the next person.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I could go on this forever, but it's just ridiculous to me that somebody who is supposedly an expert, I mean, this is,
and what makes him an expert?
It's funny, I'm talking about this book as if I'm reading that's the most pop
that's the basic,
historical, that is like, that's like reading Band of Brothers for the first time about World War II, okay? That's it, that's the level of historiography that it takes to be able to cite something like this, and he's not even aware of a basic reference. Okay. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show, ad-free, and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.